Hello there and welcome to the Pint-Sized Healing Podcast. My name is Max Thompson. Let's get started.
So I just wanted to connect to talk about 3 myths about PTSD that really mess us over when we suffer from PTSD as survivors of abuse. And the first one, I'm just going to dive straight into this. The first one is the idea that PTSD would only affect veterans, soldiers who've come back from war zones. And of course, that is definitely a group of people who suffer from PTSD, but so do, for example, first responders, because they tend to come across a lot of trauma. And also, so do survivors of abuse, because they also experience trauma and repeated trauma. It's usually not just a one event thing. It's continuous trauma, and it piles up on top of each other. And so, and definitely survivors of abuse have the potential of developing PTSD, and not everybody does, but some people do. Now, another thing that a lot of people seem to think is that PTSD happens just inside your own head, right? And this is, it happens inside your head, that much is true, but it's not something that is, super simple to get over, right? It's not something that we're making up. It's not something that we can just switch off. Even when I got to a point where I would realize I was having a PTSD episode, that I was triggered, and I'd be feeling all these feelings, and I knew they weren't related to anything that was going on in that moment in time, but I still couldn't stop it. I was still feeling it. And overriding that rationally, you can calm it back down, but it's a completely involuntary response, and it is actually PTSD actually affects how our brain operates, and so it's not something that we're making up or that we can just simply decide to switch off. It is a process, and sure, you can recover from that in the sense that you can definitely deal with triggers and heal all that stuff, and heal those moments of emotional flashbacks and and all that kind of thing. But it is not something that is just something of our thought processes. And then thirdly, something that a lot of people seem to think is that the fact that someone has developed PTSD is a reflection of their resilience, and it really isn't. Not at all. Whether or not you develop PTSD as a response to a trauma has nothing to do with how strong you are emotionally, how outgoing you are, how extroverted you are, how resilient you are. It really doesn't. I mean, that would be the same as saying only weak people bleed when you stab them. It's like, no, there's a few more factors that would influence that. And in fact, I think a person's personality doesn't really factor into whether or not they are going to develop an illness or an injury. And so that is something that really we need to overcome, because when we're saying things like, oh, you must be weak because you've developed PTSD, we're making someone feel shameful for an injury they had. Now listen, you don't make someone feel shameful because they bleed when you stick a knife in them. So why would you make someone feel shameful for developing PTSD because they've experienced trauma? In whatever form, in whatever way, shape or form they've experienced trauma, and whether that is first responder, a soldier, someone who has experienced a violent crime, or someone who's experienced abuse, everybody responds differently to trauma, and we need to be respectful of the way that trauma has affected people and help them overcome those effects.
Those are 3 important points about PTSD that I think, or 3 myths that we need to dispel. And I want to leave that a thought. And I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.